ARENA acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia. We pay our respects to elders past and present and recognise that Australia's path to net zero runs through First Nations lands. ARENA envisions a future where clean energy strengthens connection to country and First Nations communities thrive as owners, partners, and proud custodians of the clean energy transition. Welcome to ReWired, the podcast spotlighting the Australians turning big clean energy ideas into real-world impact. From ambition to action, these are the people rewiring our future.
Well, hello and welcome to Aussies in the Arena. I'm Danny Kennedy, your host, and I have the great privilege of co-hosting this conversation about the incredible ALCs with Dan Sturrock. Dan, thanks for joining me.
It's a great pleasure to be here, Danny.
Yeah, well, the Incredible ALCs is a white paper you put out. We'll get into the guts of it, but I guess I want to know, that was 2023. Is there going to be something in 2026 that we can look forward to learn more about this, just to fast forward to the end for our listeners to know that there's going to be details soon?
Yeah, well, thanks for reminding me how long ago it was. Time flies. Yeah, we have been reflecting on what's happened in the last 2 or 3 years and all the progress that has been made and the challenges that lie ahead. So we are looking forward to putting out a little update in the next month or two, just to sort of bring everyone up to speed with how we're seeing that journey. All
right. Well, I guess we'll consider this a little sneak preview. Our listeners can benefit from a conversation with you first before we are joined by Renate, Egan, who's the boss of the Australian Centre for Advanced Photovoltaics. Just an icebreaker. Tell us a bit about working at ARENA and what's a day look like in the space of Australian Renewable Energy Agency.
Yeah, thanks, Danny. And at the start of a new year, it's always an interesting question. Every year is a bit different and the market's moving all the time. I was talking about it regularly over the last few days to different people that I bump into in the solar space. And, you know, the policy is changing, the market's changing, the technology is changing. And so sometimes we're talking to startups, sometimes we're talking to big project developers with ambitious, large-scale, billion-dollar projects in the upstream solar space. Sometimes we're talking to the miners who are looking to deploy solar off-grid. We're talking to developers who are grappling with, you know, all the issues in the national electricity market. And so it's a whole range of different kind of stakeholders and different projects. And that's what keeps ARENA really interesting. And ultimately, we have to try and prioritize, you know, our time and money with the stuff that's going to have the biggest impact. And that's not always obvious. Sometimes these early stage technologies that we'll be talking about later on with Renate coming out of the unis, you know, that can be really impactful, but it's often got really long lead times and a lot of risk. And a lot of startups are similar. They have a big ambition. It's a long journey to get to success, and ARENA can play a role in helping those startups navigate that difficult pathway over many years. So it's very interesting, and you never kind of quite know what you're going to be doing from one week to the next.
I must say, it sounds like a fascinating job. Just give us or the listeners a sort of standout moment on something that's really in your memory for the record books, that you'll remember as part of your career.
If I think about the recent past, you know, I guess at the end of the year we were unveiling you know, a new project in solar module manufacturing with Sunman up in the Hunter Valley. That was an exciting moment because it's you know, a big announcement under that program. It was also really interesting because Sunman itself is a really interesting company founded by Dr. Shi, supported by Australian venture capital investors. It's got novel products that not only sort of tie into the Sunshot manufacturing made in Australia vision, but also the innovation opportunity to sort of reimagine some of the ways that you can build a solar panel and deploy them. You know, that's an interesting business that we've known about for a long time, but it was really the culmination of a couple of years of hard work to bring it to that point.
Let's talk about the Incredible ALCs. You tell me about that paper when it came out and what the context is, and then we'll talk about what's next.
Yeah, so it was a catchy name for the paper that came out. I think it was a year and a half ago.
Very funny. Was that you? Did you come up with a name?
I don't think it was me actually. I did contribute, but I had other people doing a lot of the heavy lifting to sort of bring that little paper together. And you know, but it was really about the vision. I mean, there's the context, which is, you know, there's this huge transition going on globally. And, solar is obviously a huge part of decarbonising not only the electricity system, but, heavy industry. And so, the opportunity and the imperative is massive. And, we do need low-cost energy for all sorts of industries. Everybody wants low-cost energy. Data centers is the latest thing. Hydrogen is obviously a critical opportunity as well. But metals processing, polysilicon, all of these exciting new industries that can both deliver economic opportunity, but also decarbonisation in hard-to-abate industries all require low-cost renewable energy. And solar, is a huge part of that. I mean, it's not to understate that the wind energy obviously has a huge role to play as well. But in Australia, given the nature of the land mass and the solar resource and R&D kind of history, we think we can play an outsized role in driving down the cost of solar globally, and that can deliver huge opportunities for Australia. So that's really what the white paper was about, just sort of setting that context and sort of describing the size of the opportunity. And it's a long journey, and we know that even over the last 10 and more years at ARENA, that things don't happen kind of instantly in this sector. Sometimes it takes 10 years for a technology to go from concept to commercial reality. And so this is a marathon. So we've got a 2030 target, but there's also a 2040 horizon as well, which is really important, particularly when you're looking at that early stage R&D that can produce the next generation of high efficiency cells and modules, which plays a huge role in driving down cost. But the work that happens in the field and that has to happen in the field is very different and also really critical.
And so can you talk us through what the kind of like the vision thing had goals and objectives below it? What was the 2030 and the 2040 milestones you want to be meeting? Where are we headed?
So when we started talking about ultra low cost solar and the 30-30-30 vision, that's again very, very nice and easy to remember. So the last 30 is 2030, which when we talked about it was nearly a decade away, and now it's only 5 years away, and it's a big difference. 30% efficiency was the drive to push module efficiencies from sort of the low 20s to the 30%. Which, as Renate will talk about later, is certainly within reach. The cell efficiencies are improving constantly. There's a lot of investment going into it globally. Australia is contributing a lot of IP and research in that area, and the role of bifacial cells has had a huge step up in the effective module efficiency, which has really kicked in and sort of surprised people in terms of how quickly that's been adopted and I guess the benefits that's happening to effective cell efficiencies and module efficiencies. But the middle 30 is the hardest part, and we knew that at the time, that is to drive down the actual deployed cost of solar from around $1 a watt down to 30 cents a watt. And cheap modules is part of that. So we've seen that the cost of modules decline massively through the benefits of robotics and mass manufacturing and scale. So that's happened. But the bit that hasn't really happened yet is driving down the balance of system costs. So we know that building stuff in Australia can be expensive, and that's true when you're building a house. It's true when you're building a factory. It's true when you're building a solar farm. But there's a huge opportunity to reimagine the way we build solar farms. And there's a lot of companies out there doing that. And so that's the role that ARENA's playing, is trying to bring forward those new ways of building solar farms that can drive down inefficiencies, drive down time. And there's some really exciting opportunities there, but that's probably the hardest thing to actually take the cost out of.
Can I just go back a step to the module efficiency, the first 30% efficient? Walk me through that a little bit further. I think we can get to sort of a theoretical limit with the standard silicon cell of 26.7% or something, and Renate will give us the chapter and verse on that. But how do we get to above 30% then? Does the bifacial mean that, for our listeners out there and for little old me that should probably know this, does that mean you've got two cells, one facing each way, and therefore you've doubled the effective efficiency of the module? What happens?
So the traditional silicon modules today are getting to cells at 28%, commercial, and so they're getting to that theoretical limit. Bifaciality allows you to get solar energy coming in the rear side as well as the top side. So on a rooftop, you're not going to get bifacial benefits because they're against the roof, but in the field, you can get quite a lot of uplift from getting the solar radiation coming in through the rear side of the cell, and that can actually uplift yields by, say, 15%. So that's really, it is a kind of an unexpected benefit in a sense. It's not the cell itself, but it's the way you construct a module. But that really does increase the effective yield and reduce the cost of solar.
You're all of a sudden at 40 or somewhere like that.
So then getting beyond 30%, then we have to move into new ways of building solar cells. And that's where we talk about tandem cells. And that's about using silicon, which is a very, proven, very effective first layer, but then the ability to layer other chemicals on top of the silicon that can capture even more of the solar energy and that radiation. And the researchers are always looking at different materials. So people have talked for many years about perovskites, which is one material, which can certainly improve the yield significantly up to the mid-30s already in the lab. But the second challenge then, which is the real practical challenge, is getting those materials to be stable in a harsh environment for a long period of time. So that's the durability challenge. And Renate will talk about it, but the leading technologies today can struggle to last for more than a couple of years in a real world environment. And they've got to work out how to redesign and engineer those tandem cells, the sort of new sandwich of these new materials together, and get them to last 10, 20, 30 years. And so there's still a very big challenge to go there, but there's a lot of work going into it that I'll let Renate explain in detail.
Yeah, well, I'm sure we'll come back to that, but let's do the balance of systems piece, and how are we going to address that middle 30 in the 30-30-30 formula? So you're going to drop the cost per watt to 30 cents, and a lot of that is taking out the cost of deployment in the field. How we do that?
That's right. And so there's a lot of little innovations that can happen all over. Again, it's a bit like when you think about building a house and the smarter ways you can build low cost housing. There's lots of clever things you can do at lots of parts of the process in terms of changing materials, using cheaper materials, using less materials, and just optimizing kind of logistics. When we've looked at it, and we looked at it with a consultant a few years ago, you kind of need to do everything. And to some extent, I think, to really get there, you're going to have to do some quite disruptive things. And that's where an Australian founded and owned company, 5B, is really interesting case study. And there's others doing things that are similar, really trying to reimagine the way that you can prefabricate solar in the factory and deploy it fast in the field. And so, rather than doing kind of the traditional stick build where all of the components are being brought together in the field, which people have got pretty good at, but that's sort of hitting a bit of a cost plateau at around $1 a watt. Certainly can go lower, but I think to get to 30 cents a watt, you really have to reimagine the way that you can sort of turn the efficiencies that you see in factories, building cars, building iPhones, building solar modules. You've got to bring that sort of thinking to sort of that sort of idea of prefabrication, and so that you can really optimize all of those elements, reduce waste, reduce time, reduce labor, and then sort of deploy fast in the field. And 5B is an example of that. They're based here in Sydney. They've been around for quite a while. They're getting some real good progress, working with some of the miners in particular, and they're looking to continue to optimize that technology over the next 5 years. So they've got a target of getting to that level with their roadmap. Now, there is trade-offs, of course, that sometimes building stuff cheaper, you're also going to give up some yield. So, again, it's not a straight kind of cost shootout. It's ultimately a levelized cost of energy game, but it's also a value of energy game. So it's really complicated and multifaceted to sort of nail everything at once. But there's some really interesting innovations that are tackling the problem in lots of different ways.
Can you just describe for our listeners what the 5B Maverick looks like in the factory and then in the field? I think it is a fascinating rethink of like a stick build. So the setup in the factory and then take them out to deployment.
Yeah, so it's quite a simple concept in a way. It's the idea that you can actually assemble your modules into a concertina kind of foldable, fast deployable unit.
For our dear listeners, sorry to interrupt, Dan, but we've got our hands up in a sort of flat accordion or whatever that concertina.
Yeah, so accordion style. So you can get, I can't remember how many kind of individual modules can go into a shipping container, but you can get this very high density by putting them to an accordion style format. A Maverick, I think 30 kilowatts can go into a shipping container. And so then you can ship those to the field and then fold them out using some automation machinery, sometimes a forklift, but there's other technologies that might be able to do it even more effectively. And with a vastly reduced labor force, bring those modules onto the ground with smart foundations and basically drive down the cost very significantly. So 5B can build those Mavericks for around 10 cents a watt. And then the question is, how quickly can you deploy them in the field? And you've obviously got to drive a lot of cost out of other things in the field as well, including the grid connection and other things. But that style of construction can really drive a lot of labor and a lot of materials out of the way we build solar farms.
And one of the big cost elements that you're trying to address is labor, right? Not because we're trying to squeeze them out, but labor is scarce in the field. When Fortescue or whomever asks you to build a gigawatt scale solar farm out back, you're probably having trouble finding a bunch of people to do the work.
That's right. In the Pilbara, it's a huge challenge, but it's also a challenge in lots of regional areas. There's a lot of other competing work for tradies and for electricians. So there's a real labour scarcity in the regions, and there's some reports that have come out in the last year really highlighting the size of that labour challenge, and it's only going to get bigger as we're trying to ramp up significantly the amount of renewables we're building, but also the transmission. They all require labour in these regional areas, and so if we can drive the labour hours down by 50% or even 80%, that'll allow us to build more solar more quickly and ultimately deliver lower energy costs to those regional areas as well as all Australians and all Australian businesses. And so it's a real win-win. If we can build the renewables faster and cheaper, there will be actually more jobs across that transition, and obviously they will get the benefit of the lower cost, reliable energy that we all need.
Very exciting. So what are the sort of main technology tracks you're leaning in on? What do you see as the opportunities, most of the challenges?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously there's all the stuff going on in the unis, and a lot of that's going on in what we talked about with sort of next generation solar cells. But the unis are also doing some really interesting work around AI and fault detection, the way you can actually monitor a solar farm in real time and optimize the operations. So some of that stuff is really interesting, and some of that involves robots as well as AI and really sophisticated physics as well, to understand what is going on within the modules and really diagnosing kind of all of those little issues and picking them up early and getting the yields up. So that's happening both within the unis, but also then the spin-outs that we're starting to see coming out of the unis in Australia and globally. We're working with companies like Built Robotics, which is a US-based company that's active here. We've been working with them for a few years around automated piling. We've got some really difficult ground conditions in different parts of Australia. So having robotic piling can really reduce cost, reduce time, improve delivery kind of efficiency in the field. Then there's a lot of robots working at how you can automate the placement of panels on trackers in the field. And there's a number of companies doing that, often coming from offshore, but there's some Australian companies as well. And then you've got those sort of more disruptive technologies. I mentioned 5B, but there's other companies, SolPod's another Australian company, Cambridge Energy out of the UK, Earthos out of the US. There's a really interesting kind of evolving, movement about that, that next generation, more disruptive approach. So all of those things are really exciting. There's also some of the less, I guess, sexy stuff is just, really efficient learning by doing, just project management efficiency as well. And we're seeing a lot of talk around that. And we've got some expertise in-house sort of looking at how do we take the best project management thinking just to drive out inefficiencies in logistics, in materials, and all those other things that aren't really so much technology, but just really efficient delivery.
The robotics thing fascinates me. I mean, it's not something, in my mind's eye, Australia is a big leader at, but I'm sure there's some sort of spillover benefit from having all these different applications for robots to do work in the field, pile driving, and various deployment techniques, and the monitoring and optimization of existing fields. Is that right, that robots is becoming one of the adjacencies that is benefiting from the solar boom in Australia?
I think so. I mean, I think, there's all these other industries where robots, have a more proven track record in lots of other, I guess, end users. In solar, we've seen them deployed so effectively in factories to build cells and modules. We went to China a couple of years ago, and you can just see, how effective robots are at revolutionizing the way you sort of build these incredibly sophisticated modules that you take for granted. But there's hundreds of elements in those solar modules and cells that are effectively, designed by, amazing scientists, but built by robots. And that's just the way we take it for granted, and we don't necessarily do all of that in Australia, although we're looking to do more. But the ability to build robots that do all these other more complex tasks in the field, I think we're really seeing, that the whole world is getting very good at building all sorts of really funky robots for all sorts of things. And so it's just great to see, some of those companies turning their mind to the solar opportunity because they see the size of the opportunity. And so if you're a robot expert, it's one of those things that you can take on that challenge and say, how can I come up with some really clever systems? And again, it's not easy because, building stuff in the field is probably more challenging than building a robot that's going to work in a factory. But it's that combination of what can be done in the factory and then what has to be done in the field. And robots can play a huge role in all of those elements. So then you've got to optimize the robots so they're not just doing one job, they're doing sort of an end-to-end job, because that's where you get the real efficiencies. So you don't want sort of 20 robots doing 20 things. You want to sort of get a system of robots where it's a really integrated solution.
Fascinating to hear the synergies, robots in the factory are probably making us just better at robotics, manufacturing in China and elsewhere, and then taking actuators and the pieces and parts of the robots and applying them to field robots that then get deployed against different tasks and made to work on new tasks than what they might have been put out there for. It's all the synergistic system that is just driving cost out, making electricity ultimately more affordable, which is really exciting. So before we go to Renate, Dan, tell us net, how are we going on the road to ULCS, or the ultra low cost solar models?
Yeah. So I think, we're really on track on the what's going on, up to the module level. There's still challenges and opportunity that lies beyond 2030, but that trajectory is going really well. In terms of what's happening in the field, we're probably not really on track yet, but I think there's that sort of, like you see in a lot of these sectors where you do a lot of hard work, you don't necessarily see all the benefits in the first, 3, 4, 5 years, and then you sort of start to see, a bit of the hockey stick of breakthroughs. And I think that's what we're seeing at the moment with the pilots that we're doing. Often the first stage is just showing that you can compete with the incumbents and showing that you can be 5% better than the incumbent approach. And it's only when you get to that point, then you get the adoption curve. So I think that's kind of where we're at with a lot of these things at the moment, is people just trying to get to the point where they can show that they are actually genuinely cheaper, safer, more efficient than the incumbent. And then you'll start to see the acceleration.
Crossover, takeoff. That's next. Which is the story of solar in our recent lives. It's gone from, 1 terawatt it took 50 some years to get to, and then the second terawatt 2 years later, and next one in 18 months. It's an amazing exponential technology, and we're driving it down under.
Yeah, and we've seen that in so many elements of the industry, and now I think this sort of automation and just hyper efficiency in the field will be the next thing. And there's a lot of funds flowing into it, but I think once it sort of gets to that tipping point, then you'll see a real acceleration of innovation building on that first layer.
Well, let's go chat to Renate and hear a little bit more about the fundamental R&D being done in Australia and some of the other ways we contribute to these goals.
Great. Look forward to it. Thanks, Danny.
It's wonderful to have Renate Egan, who's the executive director, I guess, of the Australian Centre for Advanced Photovoltaics. But I just think of you as the doyen of all things solar in Australia. You're always the person I go to understand what's going on. And I don't know if you remember this, Renate, but I think I met you in the early 2000s at Pacific Solar Factory somewhere in inner Sydney, in a suburb that is no longer what it once was, I believe. Mm-hmm. Is that possible?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and that's why I'm reasonably well connected. I've been in solar since 1995, and I started at that site in Pacific Solar in Botany, which is now all residential, but it was an industrial site at the time, and it's where I first joined the team, who were all out of UNSW, just about, except me, and they were spitting out a new technology that they developed, a thin film silicon technology, which my first boss was Zhengrong Shi, who went on to start Suntech, and his boss was Martin Green. And then when Zhengrong went to start Suntech, I moved to work for Paul Bazor, who's now the chief engineer or he was until recently, the chief engineer for the US Department of Energy's Solar Sunshot program. So my introduction to solar was a gift, if you like. I had a great opportunity to work with the most amazing people, and I've stayed in the field and worked with them for 30 years now. Yeah.
And we've already mentioned Dr. Scher and his new gig, Sunman, up in the Hunter, coming along, a thin film or a thin silicon product also,
yes,
I guess. So
yeah, it is.
I need to lose on that story. But your story is sort of this personification, this embodiment of Australia's contribution to this now world-changing technology set that is literally moving geopolitics and all sorts of things. There's so much there that you've offered, and your individual journey maps this sort of global journey and experience that's pretty fascinating in a single person's lifetime. It's gone from sort of zero at the turn of the century. I mean, not zero, but close to zero, a $500 billion industry in 2025, 90% of all the additions to the grid being made with these basic technologies that you just described. So you've been on a hero's journey, shall we say. Where are you now? You're at the Australian Centre for Advanced Photovoltaics. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, predominantly. So there this is a centre that Professor Martin Green, who's world renowned for his research in solar and has been working on it for 50 years. He established this centre in 2013. It was originally established under the Australian Solar Institute, but within about 18 months, ARENA was set up, the Australian Renewable Energy Agency was set up, and they absorbed the Australian Solar Institute projects. Both of them were federal government initiatives. And we've been funded or supported by ARENA since 2013. We're now start of 2026, so we're in our second phase of the centre, and we're in negotiations for the third phase.
Well, exciting and good to be talking to you for this Aussies in the Arena episode. So how does it fit your agenda, the work you're doing at ACAP, if we could call it that now, with the 30 by 30 by 30 formula and agenda that we've just heard about from Dan Sturrock, the general manager over at ARENA for all things solar?
Mm-hmm.
Do you address the 30% up top, the 30% efficiency factor, or are you looking at the 30% on 30 cents a watt, I should say, on balance of system and all those angles? Where is the work you do?
To get the 30 cents a watt that we're looking for installed systems costs, we need to continue to drive down the price of the module technology itself. And to get the 30% efficiencies that we're looking at, we need actually to invest a significant amount in research and development to move the dial and to look and explore on materials beyond silicon.
So you're working on both angles, both the cell tech and the installed system cost?
No, less so on the installed system cost. We're looking at driving down the module cost as well as increase the module efficiency. And silicon as a technology, it's going to have a maximum cell efficiency. So the individual cells of around 27%. So the modules will be expecting to be about 26% efficient. And that compares with a coal-fired power station, or a car engine, petrol car engine, which runs at 25 to 30%. We know that we can take solar technologies beyond the 27% limit of silicon. We've seen it before in different materials groups, or by creating a structure that adds a new material on top of the silicon. What we haven't been able to do yet is translate those technologies, the combination of new material and silicon and high efficiency, to a product which is cost effective, earth abundant, so it's got to be plentiful material supplies, manufacturable and durable. So there's a bunch of research to push all those new materials groups and to explore the space. And that's primarily where we're working.
Is it the material science that's getting the biggest gains, or other elements that you're diving into?
It's probably simpler to think of two strands at the moment. There's one materials group, which is a material is known as perovskites, and it is demonstrating efficiencies up above 35%. in a tandem structure. So perovskites on silicon, we can get 35%. So we've got the materials group worked out that will give us the high efficiencies, but the material stability needs to match that of silicon. And we expect our solar modules to last 30, 40 years. Yeah, longer. Okay. Yeah, we're expecting them to last longer now. So we need the perovskite material to have the same sort of stability. So we have to work on the perovskite stability as one pathway. And the other pathway is to work with other materials that we know are earth abundant and stable and push their efficiencies up to see if they can match the perovskite. So we're essentially running two approaches to try to get a manufacturable and commercial tandem technology to work.
And going up a level, just on the sort of relentless cost down curve that solar's been on all these years that you've been working in the space, how much of it would you attribute to this sort of, pretty geeky deep dive where you're going in and trying to tweak the cells and the composition of the materials and layer on a tandem piece of perovskite or whatever, versus just mass manufacturing? We just got bigger, better factories, so we crank them out at lower cost. Which is the biggest element in that famous story of 99% or whatever it is since the turn of the century and reduction in cost?
So probably at a very high level estimate, 70% is learning by doing and economies of scale. So we've gone basically from in 2005, let's say a gigawatt of manufacturing volumes being produced, to 2025, we have essentially the capability to produce a terawatt. So 1,000-fold increase in 20 years. And with that 1,000-fold increase, there's been lots of investments and improvements in automation. So the reproducibility is improved and all sorts of supply chain pressures which bring the price down. So I would say roughly 70% of the benefit we have seen have been from those volumes. And what's nice about that is that now that the technology is so mature and it's such a large volume and it's proven to be so cheap, that's translated, thank you, and with great thanks to the Chinese investors and industry who've driven this, that's now translatable. And anybody who buys that equipment set or invests in that equipment set could reproduce that anywhere in the world, because it's no longer a case of cheap labor. It's refined processes and high quality materials and really good, really quality equipment manufacturing lines and processes. So the other 30% of the improvement has been that we continue to push that silicon efficiency up. So in 2005, the average module efficiency was about 12%. So we've now taken that up now to module efficiencies typically between 20 and 24% now. So nearly double the efficiency.
So, and that's a big chunk, 30% of, doubling that piece of it is important work. And the scale that you just described, I do want to continue on that for a second, because I read in preparing for this that Nature article, the journal piece you published with some other authors around the terawatt growing to 2 and maybe 3 terawatts in coming decades. Kind of mind-blowing. I mean, for listeners out there, that's, the capacity, 1,000 gigawatts a year. It's like building several hundred nuclear reactors a year that are coming off the back of a factory line. And then you're saying in that article it could double or triple. Mm-hmm. What is that going to do to cost?
If historical trends continue, then we would see costs halve again. But they're already pretty damn cheap, and it's kind of hard to imagine. But we've been saying this for years. When is this going to bottom out? And it just keeps dropping.
Yes, right.
The other thing is that, the other point to note is that the industry has basically doubled in volume every 3 years for the last 20 years. So what we're talking about is only another doubling or a little bit more. And we would like to do that before 2030 so that we have the 2 to 3 terawatts, and the industry can actually do it. Manufacturing capacity. We want 2 to 3 terawatts of manufacturing capacity. What we actually want is 2 to 3 terawatts of market demand. And what has happened is that the industry has scaled up and has the capacity now with 1 terawatt to meet the commitments that were made worldwide to triple our renewable energy installs by 2030. So the manufacturing supply is there, but the market hasn't caught up yet. So Australia and the rest of the world need to increase the number of the amount of solar and wind that they're installing. The manufacturing capacity is there, and they're keen to run it at full capacity. It's running at under capacity at the moment. We need to drive the market.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is you lot upstream at the very pointy end of the lab R&D world, creating these incredible products, inventing new iterations of the technology. You're doing your bit. Now the factories are doing their bit. They're turning it out at scale and speed sufficient to match the pledge the world made to triple renewables by 2030 back in 2022 or whenever that was. And what we don't have is a fast sucking sound to buy all that product and put it in the world. So
yeah,
we better get a bottle on. We better do that. Does the ACAP work in that world? Do you innovate and do development for applications and ways to deploy some of this amazing cell technology?
Indirectly. So we support some of Australia's innovators who are working in this space, in particular people like 5B and SunDrive. And we support the companies who are looking at local manufacturing, including Tindo and Sunman. Where we have a significant indirect impact is that the expertise that is developed in the solar research and has been for the last decades of effort, they might be doing research in ACAP on materials and devices, but in the process they develop knowledge and techniques which translate. So interestingly, we have some of our biggest impact is in the equipment that is manufactured to support the manufacturing lines or the manufacturing processes or the deployment. So there's a really nice technology coming out of the university now it's called Lab 360, and it does imaging of large-scale solar arrays. And it was a technology that was developed with support of ACAP at the University of New South Wales and is being supported under an ARENA commercialisation round to take this technology out. So there's an example of we do this fundamental research in materials and devices to continue to improve the processes and the outcomes, and then we get these ancillary benefits that flow through the sector.
And just so I'm clear, Lab 360, is that one of the machines that makes the machines, or is it one of the something diagnostic after it's been deployed?
Yeah, diagnostics after deployment. As you're setting up a solar farm, you can do essentially quality checks, and then you can do continuous quality checks over time or after events like storms or hail damage. You'll be able to do visual, in almost very cost-effective, high-quality checks that ensure that the solar farms continue to perform at their best.
And this is where we're at in sort of emerging bleeding edge technologies. It's like perfecting this flat plate semiconductor you stick in the sun and produce electricity from, and just making sure it doesn't have any micro fissures and stuff. Is that right? Is that kind of we're getting a very stable, mature technology and making sure it's bang on.
Yeah. So the solar panel manufacturer itself now is really basically a commodity manufacturer, right? The margins are tiny if they're at all. When we're in an oversupply situation, the margins are really tiny. What we need, where the cost opportunities are now are in deployment and operations and maintenance of the large solar farms, where there's a significant overhead in the build and in the operation and maintenance of the farms. So we're working with our partners to try to drive down those costs. So 5B is an Australian company that's looking at deployment technologies, and we have a number of technologies under development that are looking at improved processes around operations and maintenance and reducing those costs.
And we've talked a bit with Dan about that build stage and how to innovate with things like 5B. But for you, for UNSW, the University of New South Wales, and the Australia Centre for Advanced Photovoltaics, what's next? Your research priorities, assuming the ongoing funding, what are we going to see in the next 5 to 10 years, say?
we would be hoping to make we're working to make a breakthrough on the durability of perovskite tandems. So these are structures where we make them on a relatively small scale, so 10 square centimeters, and we're getting efficiencies above 30% of those. And if on a really small scale, we're getting efficiencies above 35%, we need to advance the research on that so that we can scale those processes up to 35% across a module, so multiple cells or a large format module, and ensure that the material stability matches that of silicon so we can get the lifetimes out of the panels that we get out of silicon. So that's the perovskite technologies. And the other place we're looking at is so the perovskites as a technology only came to light about 10 years ago. And they've advanced rapidly over those last 10 years, and we're addressing the stability challenge. There are other materials out there that have the stability, but not the performance yet. So we want to try to accelerate that performance piece for those different materials. And then we're also looking at some new uses of AI and machine learning to scope out the material library that's out there, that's all the possibilities that could make a solar cell material, right, with the boundary conditions around cost and lifetime or durability, and then do some machine learning tests using automation around the chemical processes that we use to build these materials to learn faster. So we're bringing in technologies and lessons learned from other industries to try to accelerate progress in solar.
Is there anything that the policy world and market could support you to succeed with? What would you like to see as changes in that space?
Mm-hmm. I do see an opportunity for Australia to play in the supply chain. As we double again to 2 terawatts to maybe 3 terawatts of manufacturing capacity, that's a really significant opportunity, and it's being embraced globally, and the leading Chinese companies are looking outside China to diversify their own business opportunities and investments. And there's builds happening in the US and in Europe, or at least in Turkey. And I think Australia is in a unique position if regionally in our relationships with China and with a lot of the lead technology people in all of the companies in China have a background in Australia at UNSW, at ANU, in education and in research and development. So we're actually really uniquely placed, and I do think there's a big opportunity for us to play in that supply chain and to contribute to it, and to contribute to some of the upside of that growth in the sector. The next generation technologies will take some time to become what we would call commercial or bankable, because we have to do all this field testing to ensure that they have the 20, 30, 40-year lifetimes in the field. In the interim, silicon will continue to get better and cheaper, and we should be deploying it as fast as we can to drive that market and to drive the ongoing investment.
And that could become a big, beautiful breeder reactor where you've got low-cost solar deployed, contributing to the power system for the manufacturing that you're describing could be done here in Australia. And
yes.
Contributions of that.
Yep. Australia with its vast solar resource and ample space for deployment is so well positioned to actually be at the beginning of that cycle of breeder reactor. We can generate the green energy that you need to create the polysilicon in the first place, and then support the manufacturing across the supply chain in a global sense. We don't have to do it all here. We should do what we are good at. And the green energy piece will be an important part of that.
Gotta love a sunburnt country. Well, thank you for sort of walking us through the way it all works, and the magic that you're making happen day in, day out, year in, year out, decade in, decade out, Renate, and for all the work done at ACAP. Thanks for being on Aussies in the Arena.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure talking to you, Danny.
Dan Sturrock, back to you. One last question that I have. Are there any policy or other changes you'd love from government or elsewhere that would help us drive forward on this ultra-low-cost solar agenda? in Australia?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. And although we don't spend a lot of time thinking about policy, it is really important to the whole sector and to what we're trying to do in solar. I think that the biggest challenge in the solar industry at the moment is the uncertainty kind of on the demand side. And there's a lot of talk about that around the exit of coal and when's the transmission going to be ready to connect to new assets. So I think what that does is it makes it quite lumpy. So you've got a lot of very large projects trying to get across the line, and the lumpiness probably makes it a little bit harder to sort of really do what we're trying to do, which is this kind of constant every year increase by 40%. And sort of roll out a large number of big solar farms really consistently. So I think anything on the policy side that can even out those bumps and just make that pathway to getting projects into construction year on year is going to be really helpful.
Your lips to Gaia's ears. I hope that policymakers are listening and can help us just get a big sucking sound that's pulling through demand for more photovoltaics, cheaper, faster, better, because God knows the world needs it.
Yeah, that's certainly what we'd like to hear.
Thank you so much, and thanks for walking us through the ultra low-cost solar pathway. We'll look forward to the white paper when the revision and update comes out.
Yeah, watch this space. It's been really a pleasure talking to you and talking about my favourite subject.
Thanks, Dan. Mine too.
That's it for this episode of ReWired. Thanks for listening and for being part of the conversation about how bold ideas become real change in Australia's clean energy future. We'll see you next time with more stories from Australians stepping into the arena and shaping what comes next. Until then, find out more about how Arena is helping shift the dial on Australia's journey to net zero by following us on LinkedIn or visiting arena.gov.au.